here, we have 14 and 16 inside that panel, and number 36 for the electric for this unit. So 2416 is on this, 36 is on this. They're tied together. They'll all run together. But switch is on. There's off one switch on the bottom here, and then it has two set points. It has pool set point or spa set point. Either of them will do the same thing. It just basically allows you to set it to two different set points. I did our quick test up to 75, but up to the temperature we're desiring, which I believe we're going to test it up to the top end. So we're going to our 104, and after a couple seconds, we'll go into spark. And here in a second, it just caught there. Fan comes on. We're blowing the exhaust on because now, there it went, the ignition happened.
So we have to change, or it's automatically set to change the spark?
So it's just a different set. So if we want 104, and if you have to have downtime, you can set cool to 80, 90, so that when you're not operating, you can let it cool down a little bit. So it's just two different numbers, setting A, setting B. Temperature is just up and down, and then if you hit mode, it'll cycle in from spa to off, and then pool to off. So you just have to go through the cycle to get back to the start point. So that we're actually efficient. We can run it with it wide open, maybe, but if it's all the way closed, we're just pushing too much water through it too quickly.
So never just keep it like that all the time?
Yep, and we can throttle it back and forward just a little bit more to see if I can get a little bit better, but right now, the water going in is 74, and water coming out, of course, is here, is 84. So yeah, we're picking up 10 degrees of rise across the unit. So that's pretty efficient for the size of the unit that we have here. I think sorry? In, out. The closer one is in, the further one is out.
You say you're going to label?
Yes, every valve will be labeled. And then
just the valve?
The valve, yes. The color coded. This is warm tub A, warm tub B, cold tub. However, over here, we have warm tub A, warm tub B, hot tub, or big tub, cold tub. So it's a little bit different from side to side. And of course the fire alarm's going off, but you know. On-off switches are located directly to the side of where the pump is. Everything is on a check valve. And now everything is shut down for the pools. That's all it takes to shut everything down. The heaters automatically flow, as do the chillers. So as soon as that is lost, it stops. Along with the chemical feeders, it stops. So once the flow stops, everything upstairs shuts down. So you don't have to worry about going through and shutting everything down upstairs or in order there.
You just shut off here.
Down here is enough. Everything else is smart enough and interconnected enough that it shuts down up there.
And what's the switch for that more?
So yeah, this is just to disable the blowers, the switch down. But the blowers are on the timers inside the room. They won't turn on until those timers turn on. And they're alternate sets of lines running there. So they're actually connected through the pumps, but they're also separate because of how the ice cube switches go that the electricians installed. The e-stop stops everything in the room, but they are independently wired so they can be run or not run.
So when you turn it on, then automatically pick it up from the other system, from the outside.
Correct. And every so often you'll find that you lose prime in the system.
Yeah.
Just dump a little bit of water in,
Yeah.
or well, I should say. So this is our main drain.
Okay.
This is what we're pulling off the floor. This is our skimmer. This is what we're pulling off the surface of the water. If we go below the surface of the water, we can close this valve off. If you're cleaning it, if you're taking the water out for some reason, just closing that valve is enough to stop us from, and we'll just pull off the main drain.
Okay.
Our fill loop. Your manual bypass is on the vertical,
Yeah.
and then your input and output for the sensor well for the solenoid.
Okay.
This guy hangs in there at water level.
Yeah.
And as we cross across these two prongs, we'll get a 24-volt signal across them. And that tells it that, okay, I've satisfied demand, I should stop feeding.
Okay.
It'll run for about 30 minutes before it stops.
Okay.
And we'll go down to the units in a second, but once it stops, it's gone into fault. Luckily, you have switches on everything, so you just have to power it off, power it back on. That clears the fault on it. But that is to stop you from overfilling the pool and flooding the room.
So you keep it always like that?
I have to adjust the final height of it still,
Okay.
and then I will fasten it to the
I silence
line there.
between 20.
So this unit's the same as this unit, which is the same as this unit, which is the same as this unit. We have the skimmer is the smaller line, even though we go back and forth. And our main drain is where we are feeding our water in. Our fresh water comes in the main drain. The blue lines are all auto fills and manual fills. It loops all the way around the room back to here. You have a valve behind you, and before and after the check valve. So that's how you can isolate, and that is how you shut the water off to the room and back on to the room to service or what have you. As you go, each unit goes to one of the pumps. So we got this first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and they're in the same order on the wall as they are on the floor. Same on the other side. We have the 4 switches above to turn them on. They're all in order, I've double checked. And all of our wiring's done in there. We have control wiring sending out a 24-volt signal. What we're doing is that sensor that I showed you before, the one that we stick down the pipe that just has conductivity to it. That is our sensor telling us, okay, our water level's at this point, we can stop feeding. What that does, it sends a signal back to here, and then from here we send a signal out to our solenoid valve. 24-volt signal again, and once that's made, it opens that valve up. It's a 2-second open, 2-second close. So it's nice and gentle, nice and soft to stop and start.
Control from over there?
From this guy here
Valve
down
over
to
there?
here, yes.
Oh, okay. And you do that, the switch, this is each one, 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yes, and we are off, of course, upstairs right now. But yes, so you have a power light for just running. You have the sensor light, which turns yellow when it is sensing low water, or the sensor's not making contact.
Yeah.
And then we have a filling light, which typically turns green. However, if it turns red, you've gone in default. You've stopped feeding, it will not feed until you repower the system. Power it down, power it back on.
Anytime you can do it?
It's not going to hurt to do it anytime, but when that filling light is red, that's the only time I would do it. Because again, it's tried to feed water
Yeah.
for half an hour, and it has not made up the water.
Okay.
Other units we have programmed a bit higher, and let me think. But that's a completely different unit that we have. This sits on the aqua pool. And
So when you do that, that's turn off, just like this thing.
yep, and that's all you need to do to clear the faults on that unit. There's no mechanics inside of it.
Yeah.
Just off and on to reset it. We have our waterfall loops here. So again, we're pulling from the floor up into the unit, up through, out, and back to the pool. And again, corresponds to the side, ladies, men's. We have a pressure gauge before and after. This is a health department requirement. We do not want to see excessive amounts of vacuum before the pump. A little bit extra pressure after the pump is going to be fine, but I haven't seen it go above 20 psi on the system. And that was with me causing it to misbehave purposefully. As we move back down here, again, same setup. We have skimmer on the left and main drain on the right. We come through, we have isolation valves, so that if we isolate it, I'm not long enough to go from that side. That's it. We can get into our hair strainers. So these baskets in here will protect the pump. The basket should be in there at all times when you're running. As you can see, we pulled a piece of gravel and a couple of shavings of plastic and some other little things.
So we need to check this.
Periodically check these.
Once a
empty
week?
them out. Once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's more or less The tops are clear so you can see into it, and more or less when you see junk in there, that's when you want to. So this will restrict flow. When you have excessive amounts of hair in it, you do have to clean it more often. So the ladies are going to be cleaned more often than the men's. But they come right in, right out, settle right back down in. On the bottom side we have our gasket or O-ring that sits in. You can pull the whole thing out. Have that piece independent so that you can reseal everything. But typically it sitting inside of it is all we need. It comes on at a bit of an angle, and then it just locks in place with about 1/8 of a turn. So, if we had not closed the valves on this, water would have run back out to the pool, and we would have needed to reprime the pool.
Okay.
We have the benefit of having the autofill line here, so we can actually prime off of that. As long as we have enough vacuum, you'll be able to start priming the pump again. You just don't want to make sure you don't put too much water back out in the pool when you do that.
What do you mean by priming the pump?
So I will go ahead and do this. So we are losing water right now. It's running back because we're higher than what it's at. When this is well, or the water level's lower than what we can actually start with, i.e. it's down below, at that point then we have a dry pump. That is an unprimed pump. So it's not going to pool water. Luckily all of ours are self-priming, so as long as we get a little bit of water in there or a little bit of vacuum in there, it will self-prime itself. But every so often you'll find, especially summarizing or winterizing the system, or summarizing the system from winter, if you ever winterize, that you just need to prime the pump. And that's just getting water in there so that it can feed itself and maintain itself. However, this one's not going to do that. It's going to start right up, he says. All the systems are designed so that you can run just on the skimmers or the main drain. You don't have to run on both. We can actually keep that one closed for the time being. So, we pull the vacuum and it starts pulling water. Now, if that water doesn't pool, then you have an unprimed pump. But since we had an adequate vacuum, it was able to just bypass that and start pulling through. That little bit of air in there will slowly work its way out. As we watch, the flow is actually increasing because our line is actually causing it to displace, and we have adequate vertical pressure to overcome the push of the unit coming in. So the vacuum is overpowering the lift from the pressure, and it is fully primed now.
So whenever we clean up over there, the filter, we have to
I recommend closing the valve, yes, so that you don't have to worry about priming it.
Okay.
Since you don't have an autofill loop over here, if you lose prime on this pump, you have to put water in it. So always valve it off, just to be safe. Check your valves, double check your valves before you turn it back on. And again, we can run off the main drains if you're cleaning it, or we can run off just the skimmer if for some reason you want to run just off the skimmer.
So this one is operated separate switch. We can turn that and then
Correct.
one by one.
Yep, each filtration system is separate, so yeah, you can run cleaning, you can have one down for cleaning and keep the other ones operating. But yeah, it's the same as we go through all of the systems. They're all laid out the same, they're all more or less the same to operate. And you'll see a lot of similarities as we go from system to system.
About you?
So they're always in standby. Once we get into the room, over at the timer, you have 15-minute timers on the wall. You have to turn it to like 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes for this to enable itself, and then once it enables itself, it runs. And then once the timer runs down, it runs all of the systems in the room. Outside we have independent Spa A, Spa B, and Hinoki. All three are independent of each other, so there's 3 more blowers out there. But you turn one system on, inside all 3 systems run. You hit the E-stop, everything shuts down in the room.
They working all together?
Sorry?
They working all together?
Yes, they're all running in tandem to each other.
Okay.
So
they just round the robin, like circulation.
Correct.
Each other. Automatic.
Automatic, once the timer's turned on, it runs for the length of the timer up to 15 minutes, so 3 to 15 minutes, and then they'll shut themselves off. And these are all in the warm and hot tubs. Chill tub has the waterfall, which is what these guys are. And the waterfall just is set to run 24/7 or whenever you have the switch turned on. I don't know if you'll ever have it turned off when you're operating or if you just can always have it on. Really, it depends on the guest. If they want steady and calm water when they're in there, you can just turn it off at the switch. Over here behind you, of course. These two here. And let them have it with no waterfall. But again, it's up to you all on what you're offering for your guests as they use the bodies of water.
I'm gonna put it here some name
Yes, and
each the machine.
correct. And I'll see if I can print out some more tags.
There's so many switches in there, you don't know what you have to do.
Correct.
Maybe
It's
next
hard
time
to
when you come in there,
I have
verify.
tags and charts, and I'll see if I can also bring a label later. But the electrician has given us also which breakers we're on. So we're on 3.5 for this unit and 1921 for this unit. Of course, it's the breaker box that's upstairs. So you have to go all the way upstairs to shut this down. But you also have to come all the way back here to shut the system down. Or you can just turn it off the breaker, it does the same thing. You're just powering the one line. So you can control this room from down here or from upstairs. Just learning which breakers are. Any questions on this room? Coating of the pipes. So all of our yellow pipe is unfiltered water. It goes up to the filter, at which point it runs and changes over to white. White is filtered water going back to the body of water. We're still working on putting our flow directional labels on. They're working on it downstairs right now. But we'll move upstairs and into this room shortly thereafter. Blue is fresh water. Red is chemical or heat treatment. And black is wastewater.
And green.
Feature water, which is the same as what you'll have on the bait system or similar to what you do with the bait system.
I just want you to explain.
Yes. Yes. And that's actually written in the health code as the way they want it labeled or described, which
And
they have some variants.
Do the flow arrow on the
Yep.
pipes.
They're working on them downstairs in the big room now, and then they'll move upstairs in here afterwards. All right, anything else for this room? It does take a couple seconds for it to push a little bit of water that's in the line out, but once it gets out, it's going pretty decently. It makes a bunch of noise. The E-stop, once depressed, actually disrupts the breaker for your contactor. So you actually have to reset that, which is per code what they require. I'm not sure what that breaker is. The electrician probably will have to show you which one specifically this is, but he has been labeling things pretty well. I'm not 100% sure which one it is. But we have our large tub, tub A, tub B, I believe. It might be the other way around. And then our chill tub in the back. Handrails are to be tight and fastened. So I need to tighten this one up a little bit, as you can see. This one is nice and firm now. All of our skimmers push that much tighter like that down. This is the weir. This is the guy that stops things that are in here from floating back out to the pool. Below that is our basket. These typically get cleaned out about once a week. Underneath that, we have our turtle. This is our flow restrictor. On the underside of it, we have a little float here that can be opened or closed more. And inside of it, we have a little float that actually floats when the water has adequate water. So even through the suction, it will stay up. It will stay in that position there, which allows water to race in through it. Now, as soon as it gets air on top of it, however, it closes. It stops water from being able to pass because there's no water, and it stops air from sucking through it. Useful piece, it does stop the water primarily from bubbling over if ever we have low water in the pool. However, just set right back down, and if the system's running, it holds itself in place with vacuum. The baskets have two flat spots on the side. Those go on the edges. And then a little rotation locks it right in place so that it doesn't come out. Like I got one of them. There we go. So just a little, you almost went in, sir. That little rotation locks it in. And then once it's locked in, you can close it back up and probably secure it since you have people running around in here. Say at a hotel. They go into the room, their eyes start burning just from the air. Does anybody have any idea what that is?
Too much chlorine?
Too much chlorine? No, it's actually lack of chlorine.
Oh.
Chlorine's actually released from the water when there's no chlorine in it. You have chloramines. Chlorine itself suppresses the chloramines. Since it's there, it's active. It is actually sanitizing. You'll be using bromine because of all the indoor systems as your primary sanitizer. So you put those tablets into the feeder and the erosion takes it away, dissolves it in the water.
So indoor pool using bromine, outdoor pool.
The big pool will, only the rec pool will be using chlorine,
Chlorine.
yes. Everything else will be using bromine.
Bromine is more effective on warm water.
Warm
That's
water,
why
and also it doesn't give off the same vapors that chlorine gives off, especially indoors. Although you have adequate ventilation, if you wanted to use chlorine, you could. But again, this shouldn't smell like a pool. The smell of chloramines should be no place to be found. The chlorines are a sanitizer. The next thing, when you're in the water, you open your eyes. Your eyes start burning when you get above it. What is that sensation? What causes that?
pH.
pH imbalance. It's either too low or too high. pH for a pool should be comfortable for the human eye. The human eyeball is a 7.5 pH. Therefore, that should be our baseline. We should always aim for 7.5. Now we have some head above and some head below before it starts irritating, but the closer to 7.5 we are, the more comfortable the water is going to be for the guest or the person that's in it. So pH is important. Sanitizer is important. We have two chemicals or two things that we test that assist with that. So alkalinity is actually the hardness of water. Not specifically the hardness, but alkalinity is the water's resistance to pH waving, pH rising and falling quickly. Primarily we'll use sodium bicarbonate, which is the fancy word for baking soda, as our alkalinity increaser. We want between 80 and 120 parts per million alkaline in the water, 100 being ideal. What this does is baking soda is naturally about a 7.8, and as we get up to about the 160, 180 part per million mark, it wants to make water naturally go up to that 7.6, 7.7 mark. But down at the 100 parts per million mark, we find that we're actually pretty easy to maintain 7.5, which again is what we're designing. So a little bit high is better than being a little bit low. A little bit high, it's just going to be a little bit harder to overcome and actually get your pH back down. It's naturally just going to want to swing its way up. The last thing we do, and this is for both comfort of the water, the luster of the surface, and to protect the plaster, is calcium hardness. Calcium chloride flakes are typically what I use, but you can go to the hardware store and pick up calcium increaser, which is the exact same thing. But I recommend getting it from a pool place instead, or not from a pool place, but a supply warehouse instead of a pool place. So if you get that within the contract. Calcium chloride flake, which comes in a 50-pound bag. It may seem like a lot, but your outdoor pool is actually what's going to be using most of it. Aqua pool will be using some of it as well. But we carry out a lot of calcium with us when we come. The plaster itself gets hungry and actually pulls some of it into itself, fortifying it and making it last longer. We want between 200 and 400 parts per million there, with the ideal range being about 300. So those are the four primary chemicals we'll be using for the pool water. You have a couple other things that you can optionally get. Sodium thiosulfate, which is a chlorine remover. It just neutralizes chlorine in the water and makes it safe for getting rid of or pumping down the sewer. You don't have high enough quantities, but if for some reason you had to shock the pool, sodium thiosulfate would be what you use to bring it back down within range. So in the case of a loose fecal incident, superchlorinating the pool might be effective, but if it's one of the indoor pools, it's probably more effective to drain it, scrub it, sanitize it, and fill it. Because if it was a loose fecal incident, your minimum downtime for being closed is about 16 hours. But you can drain it much quicker, clean it, and fill it back up within probably 2-3 hours. So that may be the best route for the small pools. The big pools, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to just close because the rebound time, the amount of time it takes to fill, just is unfeasible. So you're going to be looking at about 16 hours of downtime for loose fecal incidents. 8 hours for solid and or blood and or vomit. The health department does have the specifics on what they require. Sometimes they require more. I say 16 hours because that's on the side that I think everybody's agreed to.
Or you videotaping? Can you pause?
Send water back into the floor returns. The single screw holds those, and they rotate, so if you ever have to replace them, they get damaged. One screw, they're out, put on screws. New one in, screw it back down, and you use the same screw.
Okay.
And they're adjustable, so that if you think one of them is more powerful than the other, you can actually turn one down or open one further up.
And then that one?
Yep, and it's just that one screw on the edge.
Okay.
A little spanner wrench, or just by hand, or just by screwdrivers, all it really needs to loosen up. Any questions in this room? Because the men's is the same as this one. So.
Yeah.
So that back side of the room is ladies. Door side of the room is men's. And we'll run through here. So we have men's hot tub, big tub. Directly behind you, warm B, warm A, chill tub. Those are all four on the men's side. You then have chill tub on the ladies side, ladies A, ladies B, ladies hot tub, big tub. So it looks complicated, it looks complex. Really, it's not. It's just the amount of things that are in here that makes it look like it's more complicated than it is. We will start with our water coming in. So, yellow line coming from downstairs. This is our unfiltered water. It is coming up and it is going to go to the filter tank itself. We come in the top of the filter tank, run down through the sand bed, come back out. The sand bed is filtering us down to 50 microns. So it's picking up a bunch of little itty bitty things before sending it on. On the chill unit, instead of the hot unit, we're actually coming up and around, stopping the complete amount of water and turning it to take it up to the roof. Running it through the chiller, and then bring it back down on the other side. We have another check valve cut in here to stop the water from running backwards again when we shut it down. So it runs up the one, comes back down the other, runs over, around, through, hits the flow meter. That is another thing the health department will be very interested in. Comes around over to a throttling valve for us to control how much we are actually sending through our erosion feeder. The erosion feeder is controlled by a solenoid valve, which runs back and is connected to the automation unit. On the ORP side, which is testing just the conductivity of water, that is telling us what we are running. So this is our pH control, which will display the number, but again, it's going to be manually feeding chemical into the pool, whereas we'll be automatically feeding sanitizer. So every couple hours when you test it, you might have to make a small adjustment. If it's within range, you won't have to make an adjustment, so you don't always have to add pH control. But on here, this should maintain enough sanitizer in the water. Now, superchlorinate, you would turn it on the manual. Normal operations, it is just in the auto position. If you hit listen, I'm going to turn back off, it'll click when it powers on. So, that click there is that solenoid opening up. We now have water flowing through this system back out and back to the pool. There's no sanitizer in there at the moment, but later today I will have sanitizer in there. Downstairs is done, but sanitizer hasn't been put in this yet, just because I've been fighting little leaks. They pop up from time to time. But more or less, I think this room's finally taken care of outside of one 1-inch valve, which I can't explain quite yet, but looking into it. So, how this works. Normally in auto, when it's in alarm like this, it will stop feeding. So, we have protections from this guy, which is just a little float wheel, which it creates a little bit of a electrical pulse, which it sends out by this wire to say, okay, I have flow. That's how I know if I can safe to run or not safe to run. The second thing is when we're out of range. It stops feeding chemical when we're out of range so that you don't accidentally go crazy on one side. So a high pH is going to cause your ORP to drop. And ORP stands for oxidizing residual potential. Big word to say available sanitizer in the water. So normally it is set into auto with a set point. Right now we're set really low. You're probably going to be somewhere up in the mid 700s once everything is run out and operating normally. But since we have low chlorine in the water, or low sanitizer in the water right now, we have it set really low because we're not actually feeding anything automatically. Servicing and operating this unit here. We will want to first turn it to off. We'll close our valve before. We'll close our valve after. And then we will take our pressure off by opening her up. Wait for that to die down. Unlock the ring. Maybe. Turn it off. Open her up. So if you look inside of here, you'll see that we have a basin in the bottom and then a little reservoir up top. This is the water that has been charged with our sanitizer going back to the pool. So we run through the bottom, the water rushes up underneath of it, pushes through, taking the sanitizer with it, and runs back out to the pool.
We put sanitizers in there, right? Those
Yes.
blocks? Okay.
There'll be, you can put either 1 inch or 3 inch pucks in there. So either one is fine. I recommend the 1 just because of the surface area. And you can fill her up, but you don't want to trap her because as that chemical is released, it actually
trap her?
Trap, yes.
Oh.
So right now, with that lid open, that's not going to be an issue. I put this lid back on with a bunch of chemical in there. That is energy trapped because we have a chemical reaction going on inside. It's actually creating pressure as that stuff dissolves, as the bromine dissolves. Therefore, we're actually building pressure slowly. Now, the first thing to go is most likely going to be this. But if this is tied down or screwed down a little bit too far, it might be something else on there. And then you have chemicals everywhere. To solve that, just open your valve. It can't create pressure if there's no pressure for it to build. It'll just push water out through that and it'll be charged.
So you put the chemicals in
Yes.
and just leave it out, leave the top open for a while, or?
No.
Oh.
As soon as you're done putting your chemicals in, close it back up. So lid goes back down, locks into place, ring goes on, locks down, and then the lock actually stops you from being able to open it by accident. At this point, if I wasn't going to run the chemicals automatically, but it does have chemical in there, I would just open the valve, get the little bit of air that's in there out, and then close back down on that. What this does is, if the system's not running, but you do have chemicals in there, it allows the pressure to escape and run out this line. So you never have the tank blow open, you don't have any problems here. It also saves the equipment that's around it. The solenoid, the float valve. It doesn't get junk back to them, i.e. the salt primarily that is with the bromine. And therefore it doesn't grow. But once you're back in, you have everything up and running, open your valve. Once you're ready to feed chemicals again, it'll just supply that, and it's waiting for this to say, okay, I'm ready. So you'll turn it back to automatic. It sees that we're low already, so it'll automatically open itself back up and we start dissolving again. Now, it will still dissolve with nothing sitting. It will cause that to start dissolving. So that is where we have hot or chemically charged water. That is where that pressure is created as it is sitting stagnant, collecting more and more sanitizer. So every time that it turns on, there's going to be, sorry? pH. So it will probably stay off. You won't have to turn it on because you actually do not have pH control hooked in automatically on the system. So that's where you're going to be adding chemicals poolside for that. To maintain that. But again, this can be calibrated so that you can look at it. You can see when you're rising or if you're falling. So to calibrate this, set it to auto. We're set at 7.5. Move it over to calibrate, and that should allow you to turn it down or turn it back up. So that you can just track it here, and it will still sense it, it will still go through it, it will still read for you. But again, you don't have the automation hooked in to automatically feed for you.
So,
It can be left in off, it can be left in auto, it can be left in manual, it doesn't matter on that end. But just to save the relay inside and any electrical things from happening, I just typically set it to off. That yellow, in this case I think everything in here, you have a red float inside of your flow meter. You're reading the very top of that float. So right now we have water rushing through that line, which is causing an upward force on that. So we're reading the actual pressure of the force of the water pushing through that line. And it is lifting that float. So we read on the Schedule 40 side of things in gallons per minute, which it looks like we're feeding a hair over 50 gallons per minute, which is above the minimum requirement for the health department, so they'll be happy with that. The left side is liters per minute, which again, here in the States we use gallons. Down on the filter you were just testing, that is actually your air relief. As you can see, we have a little bit of air in here. Sometimes when we get a bunch of air in there, it will be down in the tank. You just need to open that up a little bit, bleed the air out, close it back down. Backwashing these systems here, we're actually looking at the pressures on our line or the flow rate through our system. So if our flow rate is below the minimum or our pressures rise 10 more than our start pressure, we're going to want to backwash. To backwash, we turn the system off and we set our valves to where we want them. Right now, we have a 4-valve setup on this system. Most of the larger systems have this 4-valve setup. The smaller systems have a multi-port valve. Both function similarly, but this one just has 4 valves to switch. So our system's off and we want to move into backwash. Well, once the pressure's down, we'll actually reverse the 4 valves here. I try and teach people, never trap energy. Always open a valve before you close another valve. So that you know that you're being safe, so that you know that you're not causing a danger with there being energy stored somewhere. In this case, it's pressure. That is the energy I'm worried about, making sure we don't cause too much pressure. Because if I were to slam this pipe shut, right here, it would cause a bunch of back pressure on the system because that pump is trying to push water up. It likely would also damage the system. So we try and avoid trapping energy anyway. So always open a valve before you close one on the system. These are the 2 lines returning to the pool. Right now, our filtered water's coming out here, going down and returning to the pool. These are our 2 supply valves. These are coming off the pump. Reversing the orientation of these 2 and these 2 will go from operation to backwash. Now the backwash is important because it keeps our sand filters clean. It improves, lowers our pressures on the system, and increases our flow rate. That's why it is important to do that. Now, this is not on a timed basis. This is more or less on an as-needed basis. You may, and it's going to be based on the cleanliness of the bathers, how well you enforce showering before getting in the water, and how many people overall use it. Because there's going to be sweat, there's going to be body oils, there's going to be all that stuff that comes off of people, even if they clean, especially in hot tubs. People sweat in hot tubs. Very serious risk of becoming dehydrated for extended periods of times in a hot tub. So, when that stuff starts collecting, it is collected in the sand filter. This will slowly over time increase in pressure, increase in pressure, increase in pressure. Increase in pressure causes a slower flow rate. It's having a hard time pushing through the sand, so therefore we're creating more pressure on top for us to push as much water as we were before through it. If we had a VFD setup, that would be a much longer time between backwash, because the pump will probably start at a workload of 80% and then over time ramp up to 100%. We don't have that here, but that is one that's energy saving in the long run. But we are also to the point now without a VFD, we're going to notice our flow rates and our stuff dropping. And again, it's going to be volume of people, cleanliness of people, and how well chemicals are maintained to really document and dictate how often you need the backwash. There's a little wheel on here, which will give you a set point of where you start, and then it'll tell you when you need to backwash. It says clean filter on there. So when that needle gets up to, so if we start up here at the 20 mark, and we start here, over time as crud, trash, oils, etc. get inside of the filter, that pressure is going to rise. Once that needle gets to the clean filter, you know that it's time to backwash, even if you're still maintaining your flow. But again, sometimes it'll be your flow dropping below your minimum that tells you need to backwash. So it's not independent of this. It's going to be one of those two factors telling you when to backwash. I find typically when a cleaner filter, a younger filter, a very new sand filter, that usually it's the filter before the flow. But as the filter itself gets a little dirtier, gets a little aged, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, it's going to switch over from being the filter telling you to the flow rate telling you. The situation for this filter would be if I slam this valve shut, where is all that energy we're pushing up from downstairs going to go?
Back to
The
the...
weakest point on this system, which is this lid. So we have a big chance of that lid just popping right off. And then our pumps are downstairs, they're running wide, we're just going to splash and spray water everywhere. Always release energy before you...
So which one? So if I'm going to close this, open this one first? Or?
no, this
Oh.
one first.
Oh, okay, okay. All right.
We're coming in on the top and out on the bottom normally, and then when we're backwashing, we're going in on the bottom, out on the top. So if we follow our lines, right now we're coming through, yellow line, okay, into the filter, back out on the white side, up and around. But when backwashing, we're coming in through the yellow line, into the white line, out through the yellow to the black.
Still really confusing. I think it's better to get arrows.
And it's also written out on our operation charts,
And
yes.
for those 4 valves, this is really important.
Yeah.
I think it's better to get instruction to sequence or which one
So,
should be open.
Our written instructions have, well, again, with the system off, it doesn't matter. Because the energy is going to die down. But this is why you always turn the system off. Allow time for the
system
energy
off.
to dissipate.
For change any valve settings
position.
here.
Yep, and that is in red print on our tab. Always discharge the pump.
From the first floor.
You can
Shut
actually
the
turn it off
system
from the breaker. So that's the only thing
Either
on that
from
entire.
breaker or the switches.
Yep. And the electrician has labeled the breakers pretty well. And downstairs is the actual number, so switching the breaker position will do the same thing. You don't want to have us back out to repair it. You don't want to have somebody else come out to repair it. So, turn the power off of the system, let it bleed down, switch your valve positions, and turn her back on. Run her for 3 to 5 minutes, or until your sight glass here runs from, starts off clear. Usually at this point it starts turning white, just because that's the bulk of the system in here that has collected here. And then it starts softening and turning more opaque as we go. Once I can actually put 2 fingers on the back side and look through the well, and I can see the space between my fingers, that is actually usually clean enough. But it will go for the initial clip, 5-10 seconds, it'll run clear, turn somewhat white and chalky, and then turn just chalk. But as we run it, it'll clear up a little bit by little bit. And again, just put the fingers on the back of the well. Once you see the space between your fingers, you can see light there, that's clean enough. Because a filter that's 20% dirty actually picks up more than one that is 100% clean. You push the bottom of it, it unlocks it, the panel comes out. You slide your finger across all of the buttons to unlock the panel, and then you turn the system up or turn the system down. Which is very similar to what we have on the heaters, except the heaters don't require you to run your finger across there. So switching over here to this unit, we'll go through the heater first. Switch is on for the heaters. The big one is the exhaust, the little one is the heater itself. Our control panel here is our set point. So right now, the water temperature is 80 degrees, we're set to 80 degrees. We're using one of 2 settings, which for some reason they say spa and pool. It's just setting 1 and setting 2. So for run through mode, we'll see it's off. Pool set point, which is set to 65, we can set that to whatever you want it to be. It is just an alternative set point. We hit it again, it goes back off, and then we're into spa. And now we can change our spa. If we want to aim for 102, 104 degrees, we just turn it up. I'll stop at 90 for now. So it'll take a second for it to sense, but once it does that, it goes into spark, and we'll hear it for a second. Okay, there it goes. It's just lit the pilot. The fans come on. We're blowing air out the exhaust, and there was the flame. So you hear that little pop of energy as the flame comes. What we're now doing is we are running water through the system and heating it overall. Normally we're going to leave this open. Normally we're going to have water going through it even when there's no demand. That way the system can better keep track of what the system is doing, or what the water temperature is. So we come off the filter, run up. We have this valve here. It's throttled back just a little bit. We're actually allowing water to bypass the heater so that we can actually pick up additional temperature as it travels through. If you run water through a heater really quick, it's not going to pick up much heat. But if you slow the rate of water going down through that heater, you're going to heat that water more efficiently. Whereas you might get 5 to 7 degrees of differential. So if it goes in 80 degrees and it comes out 87 degrees, when this is wide open, you're not being very effective. But by throttling this back, we slow the amount of water going down here, allowing for it to pick up more heat as it travels through the heater. We can compare between our two thermometers here. Right now our water's 80 degrees going in and 94 degrees coming out. So that is a differential of 14 degrees, which is pretty good. The top end I feel safe at operating these at is about 21. 14 is pretty good, so that's pretty efficient. We're taking up quite a bit of energy as we cross it across. So I wouldn't change this too much. Let's say you had to open this valve or close this valve for some reason. Well, that is how you figure out where you want this valve to be, is you just compare your differentials, open it or close it until you get that 14, 16, 18, but do not allow it to go past 21. I think, actually, if I open this valve the rest of the way, the heater is actually going to lose flow, maybe. No, it's not going to lose flow. But inside it has a sensor. And once that sensor is tripped, which is just a heat sensor, if it gets too hot in that system, it's going to shut itself down. So it will not allow you to run water so slow through there that it will keep running. And we have a little thermostat on here as well. That little red line is where it's not safe for the system to be running. So it will shut off before it gets to there, but that is your upper end of how hot that water can be running through that hole. So we are now 80 to 110 degrees. So we're picking up 30 degrees across the unit. That is just too much. It may be efficient, but it is just too much. So we'll back it back down. I think we were somewhere in that range there. And this will start cooling off as we're sending more water this way. And yet it's coming back down. It's already down to 100. And continuing to fall. So just like on the other side, we have our flow meter. This is the last piece of equipment we have outside of our sample line, which is where our water actually goes right before. So we have our flow meter, our return and supply of water for our sample here, which if you follow it back, it's this guy here, comes over to the system here. We have this system on this system on that system on the one right behind me. So we are controlling all of our chlorine feed or bromine feed from this unit here. Again, it's the same setup, run through, set your set point, increase it, decrease it if you find that you need more sanitizer or less sanitizer from your physical test. This middle one? So these are your probes. These are the thing that's actually sensing the water. This is the pH probe, so this is what's reading the pH for this side, and the ORP probe, which is just a little electrical conductivity of the water, which is what's reporting the fair.
Do those break easily? Do those need to be changed?
The probes typically last for about 2 years, but since it's also an indoor pool inside controlled conditions, you might be able to get 3 years out of them.
How can you tell it's time to change those probes?
He will notice once they start getting older, they just they stop reporting correctly. You'll see that your chemicals are not what you're actually reading. They'll deviate more, especially the pH one. As the probe gets older, and again, you're probably never going to have to change the pH one because again, you're not running automation on this system. I think downstairs you have 3 or 4 systems with CO2 feeders to control pH. So once those systems, yeah, you'll want to change those probes. But the primary one up here you'll be changing is the ORP. Now every so often if you see it starting to discolor or you're starting to see something build up on the outside of that, isolate off, unthread it, unscrew it, and actually take some just fluoride white toothpaste. Nothing else in it, just fluoride, and clean the probe with a toothbrush. That'll extend the life of it and cleans off the junk that built up on the outside. It'll read better. But realistically, you're only going to be able to do that 2-3 times before you need to replace the probe. So plan on replacing it 2 years. You might get 3 years out of them, but plan on every 2 years. So a multi-port valve is a valve that you will never, ever change while the system's running. Once the system's down, however, you push on the handle down to unlatch it and rotate it to the desired set point. Primarily, you're going to be running in filter. Directly opposite of filter is backwash. So you turn it 180 degrees to set it to backwash. Then turn the pump back on, let it run. Turn the pump back off once the backwash is complete. Push down on it again, rotate it back around the filter. That is how you filter these systems, and there are 4 of them up here, all of the single cell units with the smaller filters. Any questions on these 2 systems? Because the rest of them are actually the same. We just have 3 of them with 2 cells, and the other ones are exactly the same as this one. So, yes, sir.
So the bromine feeding is automatic, but not pH.
Correct.
He has to put
Manually
adjust
feed the pH control into the pool, which will most likely be muriatic acid.
through open
No, through the actual body of water
actual
downstairs.
body of water.
Yes.
Just throw it in there. Like,
Sorry?
you just put it in the.
Put it in the pool.
In the pool directly, yes. We don't want to mix the bromine tablets with the acid because that'll again cause a chemical reaction. And actually, if it's chlorine with acid, muriatic acid, and the chlorine tablets or liquid chlorine, you will release chlorine gas. Now, we used chlorine gas in World War I.
Is there any reason why your company didn't set up automatic feeding for pH control?
That was in the design documents.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why the designer didn't include it, but I think it was an option, and
It may not be as effective as the manual.
it depends. And also a question of where you're going to store the solution. Where do you have room to store it up here? So it could have been a space issue, it could have been availability issue, it could have been we don't want to store acid up here, or
Okay.
we don't want to haul CO2 tanks up here. It's not effective. So, and I agree with that assumption. It's going to be hard to find a place to put pH control up here.
Acid on
Acid or CO2, and for these upstairs units, I would recommend before acid CO2. Just like you would have downstairs, outside, downstairs.
somewhere outside to store those acid.
You could potentially do that. There's also a couple of storage areas downstairs.
Right next to the main mechanical room.
Yes.
Okay.
You have a couple storage areas where you can put things instead of just the one tank. However, 1, 2, 3, 4. We still have the same 4 valves. We have the same valves over there. So, running water through the top of the tube, out the bottom through to the white line, up, around, and back and through. We're running through the exact other same piece of equipment. We just have 2 tanks because we have a larger body of water, and we need to turn over a little bit more water comparatively. Although I think, it's only a 10 gallon per minute difference between the 2. It still is more water in the body of water downstairs. So, to maintain efficiency, add the second tank, which will increase the amount of time that is needed between backwashes. But again, as you backwash water out, you're taking chemistry out of the pool. You're going to have to add chemicals in as you put fresh water in, because you're depleting what you have. So The longer between backwashes, the better overall. But again, it's going to be based off of pressures or flow rates. I've only backwashed this system one time since we started up more than a month ago. That's with no people in the water, of course. But once you start getting people in it, it's going to be more often than that, most likely. And it's going to be based off of user load and cleanliness again. So enforce cleanliness. Shower before you get in the water. Don't bring anything you don't need into with you. Don't stay in it for more than 15 minutes at a time. So we have this system, which is the same as that one. It's coming in the same side. So this is actually exactly the same as that. It's just two filters instead. Now when we get around to this side, however, it functions exactly the same. Two coming in, two going out. Runner water through the bottom, runner water through the top. And again, all of our additional supplemental pieces of equipment is the same. Bromine feed loop, heat loop, chill loop, heater exhaust, all of the things are the same. So it's just a repetition of the room. You have 8 nearly identical systems in this room, function-wise. The equipment's a little bit different, but it all functions the same. That's a big saving grace for you, because again, once you get one of them down, once you get 1.5 of them down, you have all of them. You have the understanding, you can operate all of them. So, that's a good thing. I mean, that makes things easy, because again, same pieces across the board if you have pieces you need to replace. Same problems are going to develop in one and in another, so you'll go 8 times quicker, realistically, on solving your problems as they develop. Because you'll know, this is what happened here. This is how I fixed it. Oh, this is how I fix the next one as well, if it ever happens in another system. Any questions overall in this room? Because it's a lot to take in, but blower, the fan exhaust, the one with the single breaker is the heater unit itself. Now, without one or the other, the units won't run anyway. It's not sensing airflow, so therefore it won't run. Or the unit itself isn't running.
The boiler needs a fresh air in and exhaust out.
Yep. And if it ever goes over temperature, doesn't have enough flow, all of those things will stop it from running. So there's a bunch of safeties trapped in, and we're not storing pressure anywhere like your big boilers next door. The big boilers are just holding water. These are running water through them all the time. So there's no chance of excess pressure building on the system. You have backwash, you have recirculate, you have rinse. Now, the rinse and the recirculate are for DE filters, so you'll never use those two. When you winterize, it actually has winterize here in the center, which it doesn't lock in place, so that handle just gets opened and left open, so water can drain through the system. But filter and backwash are your primary 2 settings on here. If you're draining the pool, you can run it all through waste, which just bypasses the filter. And if you have it down because you're servicing something, you can turn it off over to close, and it just closes the multi-port valve, doesn't let water into it. All of our wastewater will collect and actually pushes through the room down over towards the electrical panels here. So this is your funnel for catching all of the wastewater, fills this guy up, runs out back to sewage. So this is your wastewater line for all of the systems. That being said, it's not a big line. You want to only backwash one system at a time. However, we have a nice long collection funnel here, so I have not seen this oversplash once yet. So downstairs it's much shorter, so I've seen a little bit of splash out, especially with the rec pool. So a lot of water we're pushing. But the skimmers are what we take the water out of the pool with. It then goes down to the filters, right back up to the pool. So we just have a larger basin of water. But this one also has the infinity end, which is tied into our system. That is where our automatic fill is actually tied into it. If it's down there, I'll explain how that actually functions, but just like the hot tubs downstairs, this functions the exact same way. Drains on the floor, drains up top through the skimmers. Down, back up. Injecting the chemicals in it, and pH on this side will be controlled by CO2. So I don't have much to go over in this room. We have a ladder, which is different. It has two anchors on the back. It is a half-inch diameter on the pocket for tightening and loosening them. And again, tightening and loosening them. Slide right up, tight right down, lock in place, tighten it up to zip down. Same with the handrail. We do have vacuum ports in this pool. So located right on this wall, on the back of the bench, right below where I'm sitting here. That is a vacuum port. So that vacuum hose that I currently have out on the big pool, that goes into that socket on the wall. This allows you to vacuum and clean the pool. So you're able to pick up the junk that gets in here through that system. Unfortunately, we don't have that downstairs, but it's based on the size of the pool. So we have that in addition to the infinity bench. Continuing in, drops water over the edge there, returns water from the sitting from the wall of the pool. So you'll feel quite a bit of movement on there, but we're just displacing water. We're just putting water in, overwhelming the system, it runs down the outside, causes a nice water flow.
So how many vacuum holes in here? One?
Sorry?
How many vacuum holes?
One vacuum port here, two out there. So it's a 50-foot hose. So actually, even serpentining through all the benches and things, you have enough hose to get your edge there. And if you have a lifeguard that likes going in the water, that's actually more efficient to leave the pool come in. That's what the short flow is for. Auto-fill. Much bigger line. We have an 1.5-inch fill line for manual bypass and 1 inch for fill. It filled in about 8 hours total from empty to full, the night that we filled it. Vacuum line is new. So this is what charges those two vacuum ports out there. Normal operation point is closed. There's a flush cover that goes on top of it. It screws in place. You want to remove one of them, put your equipment on the wall, open this up, and then you will start pouring water through. There is an end of the hose that swivels, that turns, and one that does not. The one that does not swivel goes on the wall. The one that does rotate and swivel goes on the vacuum. That way, and it does matter because water does not want to prime itself going the opposite way. It actually stops having a complete locked suction system. So it's built and designed so that you vacuum in the right orientation, the right direction. So just like the littler systems, water runs right through there, manual fill, automatic loop. This one is turned on. So as you can see, power, the green light is normally on. Our sensor turns yellow when it has demand, when it's sensing not enough water, it's not making contact. Filling, it goes from green when it's automatically filling to off when it is no longer filling to red when it is in fault. Again, we're right next to it, so off and on, resets it, clears the fault. Off and on for the system, right next to the pump. And this one, we have a very big strainer compared to the little ones we had. It takes a little getting used to. But everything is under gravity. We're actually under the pool level, so it's going to self-prime. As long as you have those valves open, it will self-prime itself just because we're below the pool. So, close, close, close. You want to close all of the valves on either side of the hair strainer when you want to service it. Now this guy, you'll probably want to flash your flashlight down inside to see inside of it because you don't have a light directly above it. But you'll see things in there, and that'll tell you when you need to switch out and change it. But shut everything down, same as function as the others. Rotates counterclockwise to open, clockwise to lock. The lid comes separate, there's no ring on there. So it's the same, it's just on a different scale. Vacuum gauge before, pressure gauge after, check valve stops water from back to front. And then run through a whole line of filters. Like upstairs where we had the 2 filters, we have 4 filters on this setup. So, bunch of water in, out through the white line, up, around, over to our heater loop. Now that line, that 6-inch valve on that line is actually throttled right now. That is going to be its normal operating position. because we're creating back pressure between the input and the output of the heater. So we're throttling the amount of water that's going through there, just like upstairs. We're staying efficient. We're trying to maintain a certain flow or temperature in that heater. Push down, come over, come down, come into the unit. Right now there's no command because it's not turned on. It is satisfied. I think we're at about 72 degrees, maybe 73, 74, somewhere in that range. But when we have demand, which I will force it to have some demand, here is your thermostat. It doesn't have set points, it doesn't have numbers, it just has what you are desiring to. So I just turned it up a hair, and that heater is firing off now. So it is about to start heating. This heater is a big heater. It is an efficient heater. It heats a lot of water in a short period of time, because you have over 60,000 gallons of water in the pool. We come down to the two thermometers going into the unit. Once the heater is running, you need to maintain on the incoming side 100 degrees of water. So as long as we are above that 100, we are good. Below that 100, we have a chance of damaging the unit. So you'll want to check on this probably periodically throughout the day, especially when you see that the heater is running. I have it set so that we hit about 120, between 115 and 125 is what I've currently set to, and it will heat about 20 degrees across the heater. Now if you're ever finding that your heat gets too much, throttling back on this guy will limit the amount of hot water that is coming back into the system. So if we cut back down on this, less water from the heated side is going back in. So right now the water's 75 degrees, and we're heating it to 120, 130. So there's a big differential there that we're actually heating, which allows us to treat more water overall. It's a much higher flow rate, mind you. So there's where our efficiency comes in, just how quickly we're able to make up the pool. Maintaining high levels of heat is costly though. You're trying to fight for the top end of what you can do. The heater is going to nearly be running 24/7. In the late spring through the summer into probably late September, maybe mid-September, it's going to be a lot less. But as we push into the cold months, through October to mid-April, it's going to be running a lot more to maintain temperature. So you may need to have a summer temperature and a different winter temperature, just so that you're not burning gas all the time. But get used to the system, see where it wants to run on its own, see where it's efficient to run, and get to know the system and make the decisions as you push on. But yeah, as you see, there's a big temperature differential through the system now. And it's at 135 and 117, 118.
So how long should it take to heat up the pool?
So in about 3 hours, we were picking up about 2 degrees from very cold temperatures. It gets more efficient the warmer it heats up, but as it gets hotter and hotter and hotter than ambient temperature, it slows back down. So I can't give you 5 degrees in 6-7 hours. I can't give you something like that. Mm-hmm. It's the conditions of everything around it that affects how quickly it heats. So I was seeing on the low end side when it was cold, about 3 hours for 2 degrees. But as we were getting up to higher temperatures, it was becoming 4 hours for a degree, 5 hours for a degree, 12 hours for a degree, and that's constant running to pick up that 1 degree. Yes, sir. Something again that you're going to need to provide, because it's a service contract to have your CO2. So you'll need to find a chemical provider to maintain and send you CO2 so that you can maintain pH in the water. And I believe...
Do you recommend anyone, or?
There's a couple companies that are around. I can get you a list of them, yeah. You can go directly to chemical warehouses, but Amada Industries is probably my favorite company that supplies chemicals in this area. I'll see if I can find their contact information for you.
So what is it?
So they would be able to supply you all your liquid and your hard chemicals.
Okay.
So your CO2, your acid, or not acid, CO2, chlorine, acid, calcium, baking soda, soda ash, which is a pH increaser. So it is on the tank, that is correct, but we need a tank with it coming out on the side, not the top. But that will be our CO2 feeder.
And how long does the tank last before you change it?
It's usage, and outdoor pools you use more, indoor pools you use less. And that's your general rule across all things. But it's also the volume of the pool. A bigger pool is going to, of course, use more. But if you maintain your pH or your alkalinity in the range that it's supposed to be in, aiming for 100 to 120 parts per million, you're going to use less CO2 to maintain. But I can't give you a number because we just haven't run it yet. We haven't seen what it actually requires. And the older the water gets, the more stable it becomes until we get to dissolved solids that are actually too high. It's going to use less the older the water is until we hit a point that is too old. And you have to take half the water out, replace half the water. So it's not a set number. It is a fluctuating number because rain getting in the pool. Rain is typically acidic. That drives down your pH. So there's too many factors for me to give you a number.
Yeah.
But equivalent size pool, 60,000 gallons, 68,000 gallons, I would probably recommend 120 to 200 pound tank, which is a mounted to the floor tank for the big pools, for the outdoor pool, and maybe a 70 pound cylinder for the indoor pool, and probably 3 of those. Now the mounted tank they'll need to fill in place, so it might make sense just to go with that and get a bigger tank and run everything off of one tank. Balancing tank for the aqua pool. This is where that infinity wall actually feeds to. We'll run down, we run over, and let's actually go to the reverse side of the tank. So, we have a different unit here. This is our auto level control unit for this pool. The other ones all look like that little Jandy unit over here. But this is an Aqua Troller Technology ELC 810 unit.
And only for the aqua pool.
It's the only one that's an aqua pool because our sensor is very different. This is our sensor for the aqua pool. So we're running water in. That infinity edge just runs over. It catches up in here. It fills this tank up. Right now I have set it here, which when it's off, it fills the tank to about here. So I'm happy with that. You can run it a little less or a little bit more if you wanted to, but I'm pretty happy with where we're at. This is our eye. This is the thing that's actually automatically seeing it. If I rotate it up a little bit, oh, it's gone into, oh, I need water. We run it down, oh, it's normal level. So again, there's some variance as to where we want this to go. But I put it about a ½ inch higher than where it was before. That light will blink for a couple seconds. And then once it decides and sees that it's a true reading, but it's waiting, it's testing it, seeing if it's just splashed it away from the water. Well, now it kicks on the solenoid valve. Right here. And now we're just feeding our water through the autofill. You'll see that it comes up pretty quickly here. So, and there it is. That was all it took. We corrected ourselves with that little bit of water, which was probably about 20 gallons of water total. So, this is the feature line, so it's green. The infinity edge runs off, feeds water down to here, fills the tank up, we then suck it out the bottom of the tank, run it up and throw it back over to those 3 jets on the wall by the 1 bench, and just completes itself. There's no harm in not running the waterfall, but auto level feeder will not run without you having that waterfall on. And I think I've run it since the top of the week. It's been running pretty steadily. I haven't heard it turn on too often. So we're doing a good job at not losing water. Temperature controller is the same. No difference there. Same thing there. This will be, once we get the CO2 tank, this will be what goes over to that CO2 valve. We've gone over the big system, we've gone over the holding tank. The filtration system on the aquapool is the same as your spots, outside of it having a vacuum line. That's the only difference here. Any questions on this room here? Alright, so that is all of the equipment we've gone through.
Bromine tablets?
Bromine, yes. And they come in 25 or 50 pound pails. 5-10 pounds per unit, and the big unit put a bunch more in, probably 25. Start with half filling just so you can monitor how quickly it dissolves the tablets, and check on them about once a week or when you see your ORP starting to come down. That's the sanitizer for everything else. Liquid chlorine is going to have to get delivered off of a truck. This is that tank over there. CO2 is also going to have to get delivered from outside, but if you go with air gas, you're much more likely to be able to put a big tank outside and charge it, because it's the same stuff we use for sodas.
Yeah.
So soda machines, they're everywhere. You see them all over the place. They're bolted to the ground, chained to the wall. And a big tank might be the best thing for you, or a bunch of littler tanks might be the best thing. So talk with the representative from that company and see what they want, or from whichever chemical company.
And the wiring then, not wiring, but like they'll do it or we have to do
Hosing,
it?
I'll do.
Oh, really?
I need the stuff here on site so that I know
Okay.
what you have, and I know how to route things. So
Okay.
that'll still be something that probably will end up going on the finishing up punch list. But I don't have them here, so I can't run them. I can maybe put something on the wall for them to come to, but without knowing where they're going or how they're going, it's hard to install something without knowing where. So.
Would trucks be able to fit under here or no?
No, but they should have long enough hoses, or yeah, they can park outside on either end.
Okay.
And the chlorine truck, they come with no less than 200 foot of hose, so they can get no problem in here. Our next chemical is going to be muriatic acid. That would be a Motto or a similar company. You can get it from Hatchet Supply or Bay State Supply. Those are two more that you can go with. They both are local, just around the Beltway, about 25 minutes from here. So you can go to them or they can come to you. But they also supply a bunch of other things, safety equipment, chemicals, new fittings, old fittings, yeah, a bunch of things that they can supply. Both companies are good. Bay State's probably a little bit nicer over here. So, again, it goes to the preference of what you want to use and who you want to go with. So, muriatic acid, you can get it in 1 gallon, 5 gallon, or 15 gallon. If you're going to be manually adding it in, it's probably safest to go with the 1 gallon. But those are disposable. If you go with the 5 gallon, those are refillables that they'll take back or you'll send back. But it might also be worthwhile to get that 5 gallon and siphon out of it with the pump. It's just, do you have the area to dissipate and separate that chemical, and how comfortable you are working with it, because it is a dangerous chemical. So figuring out what best works for you, the size of it, the amount of it, because a 5 gallon tank weighs about 45-50 pounds, which means that a 15 gallon tank weighs about 150 pounds. That's a big tank, a big thing to move around, haul around, and do you want to have that much acid? Now, the bigger tanks, of course, save space, but you can also have chemical safe storage box for individual or even 5 gallon jug tanks. So that we've gone through bromine, chlorine, acid. The next thing on the list would be, importance-wise, would be calcium chloride. So that just increases your calcium hardness in the water. It gives it that feel of pool water. It gives it that shine when the sun hits it on the stop. It gives it that nice ripple effect, and it protects the plastic. So it's good all around. It makes the water feel nice. Next on the list is sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, which is the shorthand version of it. It's the common phrase for it. That is your alkalinity increaser. So that is what helps you maintain pH. That's the importance of it. Typically, you'll find that you need half as much baking soda as you do calcium. So if you need 100 pounds of calcium, you only need 50 pounds of baking soda. It just works out that way typically. Next, and we're getting now to the optional chemicals. Those are the required ones. The first optional chemical would be a pH increaser. So that is sodium carbonate. Instead of the bicarb, we're looking at just the single carb. So sodium carbonate is soda ash, is the short name for it. And this is a pH increaser. If ever you have low pH, it's very useful to have that on site so that you can quickly correct that. It also adds a little bit of alkalinity to the water, but typically if you have pH that low, your acid's already eaten away, so you're just replacing what you have. And then sodium thiosulfate, THYOSULPHATE. This is a chlorine remover. So this is actually what scrubs the chlorine out of the water.
Scrubs it out?
I'm sorry?
Scrubs it out?
It removes it. It
Oh.
departicleizes it. So it makes it no longer a dangerous chemical. It makes it inert.
So that one he probably gonna only need for the recreational pool.
And if you're draining a pool, it's nice, especially if you're
okay.
sending it to the water plant or anywhere through the sewage. They typically don't like having chlorine sent their way. But when it's only a little bit of water, it doesn't hurt. It all gets dissolved anyway before it gets anywhere. But 60, 70,000 gallons of water. A lot of water to send somewhere. A lot of chemicals also to overcome. Beyond that, yeah, that's your major ones. And then, no, I'm not going to get into those. Those will be, if that situation ever develops, there's a couple other ones that we can talk about, but you're not going to need it until you know you need it.
The blue thing?
Sorry?
The blue chemical?
No, that is a myth.
Oh.
There's no blue chemical that turns urine blue.
Yeah.
Those are,
Ask him, you say you're gonna label
yes, every valve
every valve
will be
and the
labeled.
pump,
and then
just the valve.
the valve, yes. The color coded